So, a chief of staff is a strategic right hand to an executive.
For the most part, when you sit next to a CEO all day, what surprises you most about how leaders think versus how people assume they think?
The best leaders that I've worked with actually give a lot of time to just deep work and deep think and not necessarily come to a decision at the end of a 1 hour brainstorm. There's also a lot of misalignment that's happening at that level as well. And sometimes it's a chief of staff job to get all of the leaders on the same page.
With AI automating a lot of the operation, now CEOs have a lot more time, whereas you can just dump things into an LLM and it does a lot of the heavy lifting, or at least some analysis for the most part. Does the chief of staff role become more important or less important?
More important because you still need that human touch. AI inputs and outputs are only as good as what you're prompting. And I think we all know this. Like if you put in garbage, you get garbage out. I think the best CEOs I've worked with are the ones that are most self-aware about what their strengths and weaknesses are and are either aware of where they need to delegate those things to, or they are taking steps to make sure that the rest of the team is not suffering from those weaknesses. They hire great people around them that can help shield the rest of the organization from those.
Hey everyone, this is Said with Messy Growth. So today's guest is someone who has quietly built a reputation around one of the most misunderstood roles inside startups, the chief of staff. I've always been fascinated with chiefs of staffs, but I want to understand what they look like when it comes to SaaS and how they operate. Clara Ma with B is the founder of Ask a Chief of Staff, a platform dedicated to helping CEOs and executives find the right strategic partner to operate at their side. What started as a personal realization about the impact of the role has now grown into a global community of over 400 chiefs of staffs, helping more than 35 executives find the right match for their organizations. But before that, Laura served as chief of staff to CEO of Hugging Face, one of the most influential AI companies in the world today. That experience gave her a front row seat to how leadership actually works behind the scenes, what happens behind the curtains, not just strategy, but the operational glue, so to speak, that holds the organizations together. What makes Clara perspective fascinating, though, is that she sits at the intersection of founders, operators, as well as executives. She's seen what great leadership partnerships look like, how companies scale internally, and why the relationship between a CEO and their chief of staff can make or break momentum. So today we're going to go deeper into that world. Welcome to the show, Clara.
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm excited to chat about my favorite things, being a chief of staff, early stage companies, building those companies from the ground up. So I'm excited to be here to chat with you today.
Absolutely. Really want to dig deeper into these topics. But before we go ahead and get started, for folks that don't know what a chief of staff is, could you briefly explain what is a responsibility of a chief of staff and what exactly do they do in an organization?
So, a chief of staff, as you kind of mentioned at the top of the show, is a strategic right hand to an executive. That executive can be the CEO at an early stage startup, but as companies get larger and larger, they can be chiefs of staff to other executives within the company as well. So, as a blanket term, we use principal and chief of staff. So, principal being the person that the chief of staff is serving. And the main mandate for a chief of staff is to make sure that their principal is operating in what we call their zone of genius. Why is this CEO or executive the only person who can be in this position, right? What is it that they bring to the table and only they can do? And they should be spending the majority of their time there. So anything else that is under that principal's responsibilities or purview, a chief of staff is trying to give them time back to work in that zone of genius and take everything off of their plate so that they can spend the most time there.
Got it. So you were the chief of staff to the CEO at Hugging Face. Like I said, so one of the more important AI companies today. For the most part, when you sit next to a CEO all day, do you get to see how decisions are actually made? And generally, I'm curious about this. What surprises you most about how leaders think versus how people assume they think? Because for when you're looking in from the outside, it just seems like a very esoteric skill that how did they get to do that? The decisions they make, the companies they build, but you get the front row seat to it. What's what's the secret sauce there?
So absolutely, you get a purview into what your principal is thinking because the idea is as a chief of staff, you're able to act as a body double for them. So you can almost stand in for them for meetings where they can't attend, or people can come to you before they come to the principal to ask about bottlenecks, roadblocks, obstacles, things like that. And you're able to troubleshoot those things before they land on your executive's plate. So again, to give them back that time. So ideally, a great chief of staff and principal are in lockstep about how decisions are made. And this is where I think many chiefs of staff have to hold this kind of dual brain, if you will. One brain is to think through things how your principal would think through them, right? You should be able to come to the same conclusion or decision as your principal because that's what's going to make you most effective when it comes to taking work off of your principal's plate. Then the other brain is one that is how you might think through things yourself, right? Many chiefs of staff are in preparation to become executives or leaders themselves. So it's important that you start to develop your own sense of decision making, how you gather inputs, etc. And if your decision making differs from your principal, then it's up to you to use discernment to figure out when it's adequate or important to bring up that kind of difference and push back against maybe the decision that your principal is making. So we can get into like principal and chief of staff dynamics a little bit later on, but when it comes to decision making from leaders, I think what great leaders are able to do is distill a lot of information across many different departments or projects or strategic initiatives and keep the big picture in mind so that ultimately the decision they're making is moving the business forward as a whole as opposed to moving forward one task or one specific initiative. And so the best leaders that I've worked with actually give a lot of time to just deep work and deep think, which I know sounds like, every leader should be doing, but actually carving out the time to sit with some of this information and process it and not necessarily come to a decision at the end of, like let's say the 1 hour brainstorm or strategy thinking session, but kind of talking through all the different possibilities and then coming back to the decision maybe a day or two later after your kind of unconscious has had the chance to digest it a little bit further and you're gathering any other external inputs that might come your way before making a final decision.
This seems like a very strategic and at the same point very important role because you mentioned this is a person that is essentially, in a lot of ways, is a like a body double for the principal. How do you influence decisions without being the decision maker?
Yeah, so this is where the chief of staff role can be very difficult, but is really great for people who have extremely high EQ because this role is all about influence without authority, right? Soft power, managing upwards. And so, one of the first things that we suggest every chief of staff does when they join a new company is to go on an at least 2 week, if not 1 month listening tour. And that means going around the company and just talking to people, not just the leadership team, but the people who are on the ground, right? The individual contributors, the managers, the people who are actually kind of getting the day to day work done. And that way you are gathering as much information as possible, but you're also starting to listen to the needs of people who may not be at the leadership level. The leadership team is always going to tell you what's top of mind for them. And it's oftentimes the ICs that feel like, I have things that I would like to get to move forward as well, or things that I would like in my personal growth, but I'm not able to bring those to the table in a way that I feel like those things are being moved forward. So the listening tour, I think, is very important because one, it's going to give you context on the company. But the secondary thing it's going to do is give you a chance to have some quick wins across the board. Are there things that you can
Yeah.
surface to leadership quickly to get a decision? Or are there things that you're hearing across multiple individual contributors that you're like, hey, I think this is something that we need to flag now in our culture, in our, you know, personnel that if we don't address now, months from now is going to be a big problem for us. And so having that kind of context is what makes a chief of staff effective. And then knowing how to kind of massage the right people to get things done. Because most likely you are not going to be able to get everything done
Yeah.
yourself as a chief of staff. You're going to have to rely on the resources of the company and the time of everybody else there. And so being able to kind of cash in some of these favors, but also explain to people why this thing needs to be done in order to move the company forward and get everybody rowing on the same page. That's what makes a chief of staff really effective. But it is a hard skill set, I would say, to learn on paper. It's very much
Yeah.
done through practice.
Yeah. I mean, I would argue that this is a much better way to kind of like have a chief of staff go over to talk to ICs because I kind of feel like, and please throw me some rope here, that a lot of folks that are ICs, they're semi scared of talking to the principal. There is just a lot of energy and
Mhm.
power dynamics at play, and folks don't feel comfortable sharing a lot of the blunt information, despite the fact that the principal wants it, needs it to move the company forward. So whereas where you're coming in from what you call quote unquote listening tour, it gives you a better understanding of like, hey, I'm your soundboard. Use that to explain how things are going, so I can go ahead and help them fix them for
Yeah,
you. So pretty strategic.
absolutely, absolutely. And the reason why we say do this in the beginning of your chief of staff tenure is because you can play the I'm new card, right? People are a
Sure.
lot more willing to volunteer information and help you out because you are new to the team and, they want to help you get onboarded and as best as ways you possibly can.
Sure.
The hope is to build these relationships early on and build that trust and shared connection so that down the line, it isn't a strange thing for the chief of staff to come to you and be like, "Hey, can I get 15 minutes? Can we just chat? Can we catch up?" You want to build in that habit
Yeah.
structure relatively early. And exactly what you said, right? Especially at larger companies, the CEO or the leadership team may not be as accessible
Oh
anymore
no.
than when you're in a 10-person company where, yeah, everyone's sitting in the same room and you can share information a little bit more bluntly. But as the company grows and the culture scales, you need to build in some of that hierarchy, right? Because if you have 50 or 100 people in the company, they can't all be going to the CEO. That's just not a good use of time anymore. So having that chief of staff as the buffer zone is really helpful and reminding people that, what you say can be distilled down in two ways. I can give the direct feedback
Yeah.
to the CEO, right? If there's something super volatile, like I will just go to my CEO and tell them immediately and say, like, this needs to be fixed. But the other part of it is collecting all of this information across many different people and then being able to pattern match and synthesize that into something that actually becomes actionable for the leadership team. That is how you can really build trust with the rest of the team as well in the organization, right? Is that making sure that they're heard and the solution that you present is addressing those things that you had talked about in the one-on-ones and making sure that everyone sees like, hey, we're taking the feedback and this is how we're applying it. But we can anonymize it for you so that you don't feel like, your name is on this particular piece of feedback. We can synthesize it and say multiple people are saying this because I have those inputs now and I'm not just going one-to-one anymore.
Fair enough. I mean, this, and please correct me if I'm wrong. A chief of staff is not a very popular role, especially in SaaS that is not large enough to begin with, or where you don't need that hierarchy. How do you come up with that? Like, if a company doesn't have it, and let's say a startup founder is scaling from 20 to 100 or 200 people, when is the right moment to consider hiring a chief of staff?
Yeah. So, one thing with the advent of our company, and also over the last 6 years, let's say I was a chief of staff 6 years ago, and I think the chief of staff role, this role has always existed in some
Sure.
capacity at companies. It's startups, it's always kind of this like generalist, this glue person, this gap filler. And then as you get into larger size and stages of companies, there are always a kind of group of people that are always around the executive, right? Like those are the people that maybe they have some sort of functional role, but they always seem to have the ear of the CEO. And if you need something, like they are kind of the ones to know how to get it. So while the chief of staff moniker, I think, has started to gain popularity over the
Yeah.
last 5 to 7 years, let's call it, the role function has always existed. And I think finally we're at a place where this particular title seems to encapsulate what this
Sure.
person does. And there's still a lot of definition that's happening, which is what makes this role so exciting, but also hard to define. A company with a chief of staff when they're only 20 people versus a company who has a chief of staff at 200 people, those two roles can look very different. And so, what I usually say to founders, CEOs, anyone who's looking for a chief of staff or starting to consider a chief of staff, right, is that we go back to that zone of genius. How much of your time are you spending on things that you feel like only you as a leader of the company or team can do?
Sure.
And how much of your time is being taken up by other things that you wish you could delegate
Activities.
to someone, but needs to be performing them at an executive level. And I think that's the question that you want to answer for yourself of whether or not you want to have a chief of staff. So I was a chief of staff at a 10-person company. Hugging Face was only 10 people when I joined, and I was a chief of staff. Versus, many companies may decide to have a chief of staff later on
Yeah.
when there are 50 or 75 people. It really depends on the executive and how they've split up the work among their leadership team, the rest of the company organization. And the moment they feel like less than 50% of their time is
Yeah.
being worked on that zone of genius, I think that's a good time to start to consider a chief of staff.
Yeah. So it's not like there is a, like you mentioned, there's not a particular stage at which you need to go out and hire a
Mhm.
chief of staff. It's
Yes.
really organization dependent, and of course leader dependent. I know a lot of folks that are,
Yep.
they're very hands on, and that's okay because that's what
Hmm.
strives them. That's what operates them to the point that they're the ones who are paying out like the salaries and processing all the deal stuff.
Yeah.
Sure, I mean you can do that. I mean at some point it would be nice to have kind of like a buffer. It just helps you, like you said, to focus on tasks. Your job is to focus on the direction of the company to make sure this thing is operational 365 days a year, and it continues to go on. So very critical role.
Exactly.
Um, so I wanted to ask you, this kind of role, it starts to make me think that you're inside where everything is happening, like the good, the bad, the messy, kind of like the glue that touches all aspects of an
Mhm.
organization. Is there something about leadership that most employees never realize?
I think that there's a lot of top down that happens at organizations, right? Leadership team comes up with the strategy or the annual planning, and then, it kind of gets distilled down to the company level. A lot of the time, there's also a lot of misalignment that's happening at that level as well.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's the chief of staff job to get all of the leaders on the same page, right? Because just because we say our North Star is, let's say, like to be the number one XYZ in this kind of marketplace, that can look different depending on which function of the company you sit at. The CTO may interpret that differently from the
Yeah.
CFO, right, or the COO. And so that kind of interpretation is what the leadership team often needs to align on and sometimes does not happen before the entire plan is presented to the company. And so I think a great chief of staff kind of goes to each of those leaders and says, okay, what does this, North Star mean to you? And are we all aligned on that? Once we're aligned on that, then we can break it down into the OKRs. Then we can break it down into the KPIs and the metrics and all of that. But if we're not even aligned on what that kind of target goal is
Yeah.
overarching, then that's where a lot of confusion is going to continue to trickle down throughout the company. And then individual contributors don't feel like they know what they're doing in order to contribute to that North Star. So I would say, like, while you would hope that your leadership team is like everyone's aligned and everybody gets on the same page, that's where a lot of people dynamics come in. And that is where there's oftentimes misalignment. And I think a lot of people don't see that in the leadership team level because they're locked away in a room, right? They're talking on hours on end. And it seems like they come out with this spreadsheet or this idea or this plan that feels like it's very polished. But there's a lot of back and forth that happens. And probably even after the plan is presented, that's still happening.
100%. 100%. I want to rewind the clock back a little bit, which is you worked inside Hugging Face during the AI boom. I feel like
Mhm.
while AI is now pretty normalized in a day to day, at least for SaaS and tech sector, we all use it. Majority of the world still hasn't caught up to it just yet. And it's going to take some time, naturally, even though that the speed of utilization is a lot faster than it was before, but still there is that gap. From that vantage point of working at Hugging Face during the AI boom, um, was there something that was happening that you saw that the rest of the industry didn't yet understand fully or capture?
Yeah, this is a really good question. And what I can come at it from is that I think that the thing that continues to be a thorough line in AI is how much of a communal effort it is.
Mm,
Right. And one of the things that I saw at Hugging Face very early on, even though our team was very small,
sure.
the team working at Hugging Face, there were contributors from all over the world that were contributing to the model library and the model hub that we were building. And I think that kind of progress by many is something that continues on today where, people are sharing their knowledge very openly on YouTube or, through tutorials and courses and all of that. And what I've learned from a very early stage is that like AI is not built in a bubble, right? It's not built in it within just your company and like you push out this product and that the world is going to suddenly embrace it. No, there is a lot of collaborative energy that happens even from the LLMs that you train your
Sure.
model, any sort of product on. When even if you're building a product for a specific audience, there are still so many inputs that you need from external spaces that come in. And I think that was something that I saw at Hugging Face very early on was that the thousands or hundreds of thousands of contributors that we had were all contributing to this mission to kind of move AI forward and remembering that there is no singular entity that kind of like will ever control all of the AI space, but instead it's always going to be multiple. And keeping that in mind, that it is a community effort, I think was one of the things that I saw very early on and continues to be true today.
It's a team sport, right? Like that's essentially all there is to it. So a lot of
Mhm.
the parts have to come together for this to work and work well. Obviously, and go in the direction we all want it to go. Um, so what's a problem that I want to ask about it? I've seen firsthand that as companies grow, there's a lot of issues that come up. Naturally, you're evolving, you're hiring more people, the processes are getting complex. you're probably getting funding. That adds another layer of complexity on top. Managers get hired, then those managers
Mm-hmm.
have team leads and there's a lot of layers of complexity that gets added, excuse me, as company grow. Is there a problem though that shows up almost in every startup once it crosses a certain mark of say 50 or 100 employees?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is kind of operational load, right? An operational process that starts to fall apart. When you're 10 people in a room, you can have an all hands where everybody goes around the room and talks about what they're working on. And that's like a pretty good all hands.
That is.
But once you even hit 20 people, like you can't do that anymore, right? Not everybody can spend 5 minutes talking about what it is that they did. And then you have to pretty quickly introduce structure into those meetings, which can
Yeah,
feel like whiplash for people who were
100%.
there early on where you're like, "Oh, but the culture is like free flowing and we're transparent and we can share all of these things with you." And so, I think everybody probably knows like, okay, sure. When you add more engineers, like you have to have more documentation. Like there's like more triaging and there's more guardrails when it comes to pushing code. That stuff feels pretty standard. But one thing that I always try to remind people of, especially in the chief of staff realm, is operational debt, right? If you do not take the time to write down the processes and create these playbooks very early on, even when you're 10, 15 people. Once you get to 25, 50 people, that knowledge is now living in someone's head,
Yeah,
and that person becomes the linchpin of probably 5 or 6, like, pretty crucial operations into your company, and if that person leaves, you lose all of it.
yeah.
And so, that documentation piece, it can sometimes feel a little bit thankless. It's like, "Oh, you want me to take, how much time in my day to write down the steps of, like, how I cancel a membership," or whatever it is, that feels very manual, and you're like, "I can just do it in 30 seconds, like, why do I need to spend 2 hours writing this out?" But that payoff is worth it, once you start to grow the team a little bit more. Um, so operational debt, I think that's like what I'll call it, as opposed to technical debt, which I think a lot of people are familiar with. And then the other part is, really being more intentional about your culture. Again, your first 10 hires, you tend to hire people like you, right? And you work together
Yeah,
well because you know all these people so personally. But as you start to scale, you start to hire people who are no longer kind of the catch-alls, the gap fillers, the generalists, and you start to hire people in more functional roles. And those people are going to come with their own set of cultural guidelines that they may feel is very obvious to them.
yeah,
But you're going to need to take some time to kind of set that across the board so that everybody's operating from the same principles, right? Same as your strategy, where everybody needs to be on the same page of about what it means in order to execute on that. Your culture needs to be the same way. And I see that companies who don't set that kind of cultural guideline early on start to have a lot of conflict down the line because people all felt like, oh, the way I'm doing things is the way that it's accepted because it's worked so far in my career or so far in the company. And that's where a lot of kind of like people dynamics really come
yeah,
to play.
yeah, 100%. You said something interesting about operational debt. And I totally agree with you. I also think that the person who has that knowledge, it's good for them that the fact that this is all documented. Because while they might be used to getting all these Slack pings and messages about, hey, can you go ahead and fix that? And they feel important, at certain point it's a tax that starts to pile on. And I mean
Hmm.
you're going to spend some time, you're on vacation, if somebody's going to ping you late at night. It's fun because you feel like you're wanted, but at some point, it will tag on and it's too much. So you need to be able to have these certain processes where, like, as little pings as possible, so you can focus more on operational stuff as opposed to just fixing out fires. Excuse me, putting out fires for the most part. So,
Exactly.
uh,
Exactly. And the more time that you're spending on these tasks, right? The less time you're able to actually expand your scope of work because your time is being taken up by the things that people know that you know how to do, but it's not giving you the chance to expand into other parts of the business or other parts of your career because you start to get very bucketed in just being able to be the person that does XYZ as opposed to I'm the person who's learning how to do ABC. So I think it's both ways. Like, yes, you can feel important. I've definitely been there early on in my
yeah,
career. Like, I was like, let me be the person to do all the IT work, right? Like,
yeah,
that's like, I'm important, like, I'm necessary. Sure. But if you actually, and I'm sure we've all heard this adage before, like, you got to teach the man to fish. If we can write down the playbook and somebody else can do it themselves, like, suddenly I don't have to do, 5 people's laptops anymore. And I have so much more time to go and
yeah,
explore other parts of the business that might actually be more beneficial to my career in the
yeah.
long term.
It reminds me of a story of a manager I used to have, and that manager deliberately would not answer Slacks in real time. At first, I came from a
Mm,
company where Slack just meant it's instant DM. I
yeah.
It's a direct message, sure, but I thought it just meant instantaneous, which is if I need help, somebody will help me. And that person would only answer Slack twice, once in the morning, once just before leaving work. And I asked him
Uh-huh.
2, 3 years down the line, I was like, why? How come you don't answer your Slacks? We all get notifications. I see you have Slack on your phone. I have sat down with you. I've seen messages come through. He says it's because if I start answering every question that comes my way, you're never going to lift a finger and try to figure out the answer yourself or try to figure out if there's other ways that you can go find that information, be that be a Notion wiki, be that be, I don't know, our support documentation, maybe another person in the company. So you don't become a bottleneck, but at the same time, you're not a, like you said, catch all for just about every questions that come out. And if I'm answering questions, 40 of them, it's 50 people in the company, everybody has one question a day. The amount of energy and time it'll take for me to go through all of that, it's just not, it's not going to help me scale, and I can't focus on these tasks. So, I really like that. At that time, that I thought that person was nasty. Like, how could you? Like, how dare you? But over time, as I started, I was a manager. I started having people that I was leading. Sense. Yeah, I understand it. I get
Yeah.
it.
Mhm.
So this
Mhm.
operational debt, I think that's 100%. It's said. If a company is not focusing, you got to get started. Which begs kind of like a follow up on that, though. Is there a particular way folks should go about recording this information? I know folks prefer Google Docs, Notion. Some folks prefer Looms. Do you think a combination of both is good, or just really feel like as long as the information is there, let's just go ahead and put it in?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think this is the question, age-old question I always get, like, what's the best tool for X, right? And my short answer for anyone is the best tool is the tool that you're going to use. So if you like Looms, of course, like do Looms. If you like Notion, you like Notion. And again, this is also where I think the operational debt starts to build up. Is that when you're 10 people, like everyone can use whatever tool they want. Like some people are on Google Docs, some
Yeah.
people are on Notion, and everyone's sending loops back and forth in the Slacks to each other. And like that's probably fine again when you're early stage and small. But I would say as a chief of staff, sometimes your job is to pick the tech stack, is
Yes.
to pick the thing that everyone is going to use. Because not only are you building up operational debt, but if you have 15 different subscriptions,
Oh
like
my
personal
god.
subscriptions to 15 different things, like you're leaking money, right? At some point. So, as a chief of staff, you come in and you can do a triage and you can, again, do your listening tour. What are the tools that everybody likes using? Why are people using them? Is there a clear winner? If there is, everyone's like 90% of the companies on Notion and like there are two holdouts who are still on Google Docs, you force that transition over and everyone's on Notion now, right? If it's like a little bit more up in the air, then, you sit down to really understand what are the things that people like about each of these platforms and make the call that way. But this is a little bit of that kind of chief of staff role as well, right? Like one acronym I like to use about the chief of staff role is that you work on culture, operations, and strategy, COS. And so, this kind of platform picking is going to kind of fall into that operational and strategy
Strategy
um
100%.
bucket of as well, and a little bit of your culture as well, right? Like what team are we? Are we a Notion team or are we a Google Docs team? And so um use the thing that works best. It's probably going to be a combination of things, right? You can't always just pick like only Notion and everyone's going to be happy. People digest information in different ways. So maybe it's a combination of written and Loom. And, on top of that, maybe there's a couple click-throughs or PDFs that are embedded or whatever that might look like. So again, the best tool is a tool that, you and your team are going to use and everyone's going to feel comfortable using. There's always going to be a few people who are going to
Yeah.
want to try the next new shiny thing, but, then you're going to have to make the case of why we're going to move 150
Yeah.
people over to a new tool, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I'm sure you've experienced this, Clara, because it's something that I've seen quite a lot in companies that you join a company and there's some OGs and they kind of feel like they're hard to change or adopt to new tools. Like
Mhm.
you come in with an idea saying, "Hey, so and so tool, I've used it in the past, pretty good," or new process I feel like could be very productive. But their response, we've always done it that way and it worked so far. So when I think of chief of staff and when you tell me a body double and you're coming in, that is already a very challenging role, especially when you add a layer of folks that have been there for a while and this is how we do things type of mentality. How do you
Mhm.
tackle that? Is there a soft way?
Yeah. I think, yes, there's a soft way, and the kind of ultimately what you're trying to do is kind of tell people, okay, yes, what got us here is not going to get us there. Like what we've done for a long time was great when we were 25 people, but we're not 25 people anymore. We're 100. We're going to be at 150. So if we want to keep doing what we have been doing, then we're going to keep staying at this ARR. We're going to keep staying at this. And if that's what you want, then, you know, your prerogative, but most people, I'm guessing, is like you want to continue to build on this rocket ship. You want your company to grow. So, helping them see it from a bit different perspective, right? Helping them see that it's not just about you as the individual and what your preferences are and how you like to work, but instead, how do we get everybody, right? Rising tide lifts all boats. How do we get everybody at the next level and everybody to help get our company to whatever goals that we're trying to do? So that's one of the ways. I would say, like, stick way, I'll call that the carrot way, right? Lead people to try to understand that realization. The stick way as a chief of staff is that you have the ear of the CEO, and ultimately anything that you are doing, the CEO is mandating that you do. Really try to tell chiefs of staff, like, you use this trump card, let's call it, very, very like very, very little, because
Yeah.
if you use it too often, then it a little bit starts to
Backfires.
become like the boy who cried wolf, right? It's like, okay, everything is coming from the CEO. Everything that, Clara's asking me for is like the most important P0 thing. So, use that sparingly, but at the same time, know that that is a card in your arsenal. Like, ultimately it is true. And, I remember talking to the CEO, the chief of staff at Reddit a long time ago, and he was like, ultimately, what I say, like, should go because it is coming directly from the
Yeah.
CEO's mouth, right? But that is not a tactic that I like to use often because it creates this disparity with the person that you're talking with. That's like, hey, I am, you're really drawing on that hierarchy
Yeah.
again, when in reality, as a chief of staff, you really need to be kind of working high low. You should be in the room with leadership, but also being able to relate to the boots on the ground and the people who are kind of pushing the things forward on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah. 100%. It resonates a lot. I want to talk about this. You've turned this role into a career path and built a community, like I said before, of over 400 chiefs of staffs worldwide. Why do you think this role resonates so much with ambitious operators? Like you said, one of the things in the very beginning, you said, it started off as somebody who was like a go-getter and essentially who was a generalist, but it later turns into a role that is very specific and narrow in the sense that you have responsibilities, you're still tackling a lot of different things. Why is it resonate? Do you think that there is a pattern here?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons. About 6 years ago, like, let's call it my class or cohort of chiefs of staff, many of the chiefs of staff that I knew wanted to become entrepreneurs or CEOs themselves. And so this is a great training ground for that kind of career path. If you decide, like, I want to start my own company, being a chief of staff is very much a crash course MBA, right? You're
Mm,
pretty much getting in the weeds of exactly what a CEO is doing, but ultimately your finger is not on the red button. You're kind of getting and
yeah.
teeing your
Yeah.
executive up to that point to, like, make that final decision. And I think that is very attractive to a lot of people who are like, let me just try this out. Let me see if, like, the kind of high pressure situations are for me. And also, you're going to learn a lot, right? Whether or not you work really, really well with your executive or really poorly with your executive, you're going to learn a lot about what you like and what you don't like about their leadership style. And you can apply that to your own leadership style down the line. So there's this, I think, class of chiefs of staff who take on this role because they want to start their own companies in the future, and it's a great training ground for that. More and more so, I would say over the last 5 years or so, is that we're seeing chiefs of staff take this to become a career opportunity and become a chief of staff long term, whether it's with the same principal or different principals, time after time, different companies. And I think part of it is that a chief of staff is quite humble by nature. It's a lot of servant leadership. It's a lot of leading from the shadows and not getting a lot of, front facing limelight
Yeah.
credit. And some people like to operate there. They're like, I like to help move the company forward. I like to do the strategic planning, but, like, I don't need to be in the limelight. And I just want to be that support system to a really great executive to help them be the best version of themselves. And I think that that is a personality type that is has like, again, existed for a long time, but there was no real clear growth path for them. But now there is. You can continue to grow with your executive for 3 to 5 years. It doesn't have to just be a 2 year
Yeah.
stint. And obviously, as your executive is growing and the company is growing, their purview is changing, which then affects your purview as a chief of staff. Like, the first 3 months on the job are different from the next three, from the next three,
100%.
from the next year. And so it's one of those roles that continues to change over time, and it's
Mm.
never the same at any given point in your career or tenure as a chief of staff. So that makes it really attractive for some people to stay in because it's like kind of unlimited growth potential. without needing to move around or take on a new title or, start to build a bigger and bigger team underneath yourself. And so, those are kind of the two things that I really see this role continuing to expand into. Some people also use this role as a kind of exploratory phase to figure out what it is that they want to focus on next because it is such a general role. You get to try a lot of different things and maybe decide one of them is the next part of your career. So it's a great kind of pivot point as well. Um, but I would ultimately say the underlying thing that makes a chief of staff role so exciting is that there's no right way into it and there's no right way out of it. And so it gives you this opportunity and potential to really set your career in a different path that most kind of linear growth paths don't allow you to do.
Upon doing research about being of chief of staffs in tech sector in SaaS, I always do one of these things where I go down a rabbit hole on Reddit. And one of the things that I found out very quickly is there is a lot of critics that say chief of staff role is just corporate babysitting in a lot of different formats. What do they fundamentally misunderstand about the role?
Yeah, I think that that's distilling it into a
Sure.
pretty simple term. I mean, you could even say like, what does a manager do? Is a manager just babysitting their team, right? Like, sure, if you want to use that, if you want to kind of distill it down to something
Yeah.
that's like almost farcical, like I guess you can say that. But
Sure.
it's the same reason why great executives work with great coaches, right? It's
Yeah.
like if you have the right person to be a scaffold underneath you, it's going to accelerate the amount of stuff that you're able to do, and you're going to be more efficient and you're going to work in a way that is best suited for you.
Yeah.
If you feel like your chief of staff is babysitting you, that's probably not the right person for you. Like this
100%.
person should not be, trying to stop you from doing things or, prevent you from exercising the kind of authority that you have. Like
Sure.
a great chief of staff should be enabling you. And I think that's a little bit counter to what like a babysitter is doing.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. 100%. I think it's a lot to do with the fact that managers are considered normal, so to speak, because everybody has them for the most part.
Mm.
But since this is a new role, there's a lot of that comes out, which is is it corporate babysitting or not? But I think it just needs time a little bit more to normalize for them. Um,
Yeah. Yeah.
Very quick one. I want to ask one more question after that before we head into our rapid fire round. With AI automating a lot of the operational, now CEOs have a lot more time, whereas you can just dump things into an LLM and it does a lot of the heavy lifting, or at least some analysis for the most part. Does the chief of staff role become more important or less important?
I would argue more important because you still need that human touch, right? There's no point at least that I know of right
Sure.
now that anyone is just giving AI the workload and being like, "Great, like I'm just going to trust exactly what it says and do
Good luck.
exactly as it says." Right? I hope not. I hope not. And so having that chief of staff is that extra balance check, but also that human component, right? Where um, oftentimes your AI inputs and outputs are only as good as what you're prompting. And I think we all know this. Like if you
100%.
put in garbage, you get garbage out. And so what the chief of staff is there to do, I think that's super important, is to help you as a principal think through like all of the different inputs that you're considering and how to distill that into good information to then feed into an LLM or whatever it is. Oftentimes our chiefs of staff are also the ones shepherding in AI adoption as well. So there's this kind of meta aspect of like bringing in AI. What does it mean to be an AI forward company or, like an AI
Yeah.
first company, whatever that means. And not from a product standpoint, but from like, how are we all using this internally as a company, right? Because if the information is being shared across different departments, what you're feeding it, there's a lot of inputs that you are going to now need to recognize are maybe creating different decision trees or whatever it is across your organization. So knowing what best practices are, good hygiene, right? All of that kind of stuff sometimes will fall upon your chief of staff to start to understand how people are already using it and then let's say later on pick a tool or something like that. So I think that this human aspect is even more important now that AI is here. AI is there to help make the manual and the automations take those off your plate, give you time back, right? Absolutely be utilizing all of that. And I would say good chief of staff is not doing automatable tasks or rote tasks either for a principal or executive. They truly are there as your sounding board, as your second brain. And I don't think we've been able to recreate that through AI just quite yet. You still need that kind of interaction, that kind of back and forth, and also just a different perspective. Like, I think one thing that AI sometimes will put us down is like it'll give us an echo chamber of what it
Oh,
is that we've already
100%.
told it multiple times. And it's like, yeah, this is a great idea. And you're like, well, yeah, I came up with that idea. So of course it's going to continuously tell me it's a great idea. Like, and then you start to get a very narrow field of vision.
Yeah,
So having, not just your leadership team, but your chief of staff be that kind of honest sounding board for you is going to continue to be very important.
100%. You've spent years sitting next to CEOs watching how they operate. If someone listening today wanted to eventually become a CEO themselves, what's one thing they should start doing differently?
Yeah, I would say take stock of yourself. I think the best CEOs I've worked with are the ones that are most self aware about what their strengths and weaknesses are. And while they are not looking to eradicate their weaknesses, they are either aware of where they need to delegate those things to, or they are taking steps to make sure that the rest of the team is not suffering from those weaknesses. And so I think as, every CEO has different things to work on. Some are more of that visionary, some are more operators and like are trying to get a lot done themselves,
Yeah,
running a payroll, for example, because they know how to do it. But thinking about, okay, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? If I were to hire somebody tomorrow, would I want them to force multiply me or complement me? And then on top of that, what are the things that I know I can do best and how can I spend more time doing those things to really become the best person at that specific set of skills so that I can run a company the best the way that I can. So it's, I think any role that you have, always be self-reflective, always take some time to think about what
yeah,
are things that you can improve and do better. But like I said, the best CEOs I've ever worked with are very self-aware, and that way they can be very honest about what they can and cannot do, and it's not like a hiding of things that they are uncomfortable with or kicking the can because they don't feel like they can do it, but they hire great people around them that can help shield the rest of the organization from those.
yeah. This is fantastic, Clara. So, we have a tradition here. It's called a rapid fire round. Very quick questions, very
Okay.
quick answers. The best advice you've received, business or personal?
Yes, give time to time. Got that advice from my CEO at Hugging Face, and I thought I was being very productive because I had meetings every single hour of the
Yeah,
day. And he was like, "When do you think about stuff?" I was like, "What do you mean? I'm thinking about stuff all the time." And really just blocking off that time for deep strategic thought. And you don't have to just sit at your desk. Like take a walk, get outside, change up your environment, but let your brain process these things that you've been back to back on for the last day or so that you can more holistically see the big picture.
100%. I walk my dog in the middle of the day, and honestly, it's the best way to kind of like just if sun is shining, you're like, not listening to a podcast, you're just processing through things, and I think it helps quite a lot.
Mhm.
Good advice. On the flip side, advice you ignored or wish you had listened to.
Um, Advice I had ignored. I think we talked a little bit about this earlier, but feeling important, right? Because I had a lot of tasks, because I had a lot of institutional
Yeah,
knowledge, and not letting go of that or not putting that down because it made me feel important. And I think that is something that feels counterintuitive, but is necessary as a chief of staff and also in other startup roles is to try to either automate or delegate yourself out of a job. If you're able to do that, then again, it frees up your bandwidth to then try more, to learn more, and see other parts of the business, which will be much more um, beneficial for your career long term.
100%. What would you tell your younger self, say 7 to 10 years ago?
I would say that it may feel like you may not know what you're doing with your career. I mean, I look back on it now
Yep.
and I think a lot of chiefs of staff can relate to this is like it feels very windy. It has all these titles that like don't seem that they fit together linearly, but hindsight is always 2020 and your narrative and your career story is what you make of it. And so as long as you are taking the time to learn the things that you want, one piece of advice I try to give anybody I mentor is like chase your curiosities, right? If there's something in the business that you're curious about and you feel like you're not getting insight, try to free up 3 to 5 hours of your week or put in the extra 3 to 5 hours to go to that team and ask them, like, "Are there projects I can help out on? Could you use an extra set of hands?" Because that experience is going to be more valuable in especially today's day and age where, like, so much AI
100%.
is there to automate things, that your experience and understanding what a business looks like holistically is going to be more important than, like, certain titles that you hold. And so going to go do that, I think I always felt very nervous about my career because I wasn't advancing in like software engineer, senior software engineer, manager type of titles. But what I think that has helped me with building my own business and eventually, becoming a chief of staff 6 years ago is having that breadth of experience.
100%. One ongoing challenge in your current work that keeps you up at night.
Yeah, I think I am starting to build out my team as well. Our company has been
Yay.
growing and scaling. We're 5 people now, so I mean it's not like we're huge, but I
Fantastic.
do sometimes still feel like the linchpin of the company. And if something were to happen to anybody at the company, I need to take on that workload again. And so I'm always trying to balance, scaling our team with the scope of the community that we're building, the recruiting services that we offer, and how fast to grow the kind of human side of our team and complement that with the technology side of things. And I think that's probably a very common refrain you hear from many founders.
Mm.
But how do you kind of work yourself out of being in the day to day of the business and being able to oversee the business, but also building in contingency so that if something were to happen to a single team member, you're not the person that's always stepping in to fill in
Yeah,
the spots.
this is great. Well, good for you. I hope it continues to grow and come back here and tell us the story of how it went.
I would love to. I really appreciate the conversation, and I hope this is helpful for your audience.
Two more questions. I gotta ask them though. This is one for me, so personally. Your favorite restaurant, meal or spot?
Oh my goodness. Okay, I am usually in New York. I'm calling in from California, but it's been so cold there recently, as
Yeah.
I'm sure many people have seen with the blizzard and whatnot. But there is an udon restaurant called Raku, which I love to go to, especially when it's a cold day out. It's like warm soup, chewy noodles, and a lot of great different toppings. So would highly recommend.
Have you been to Xi'an at the Famous Foods?
Yes, of course. Love.
Love there. I love their food. It's so good. It's spicy though, like some of their cumin beef. No, sorry, it's cumin lamb, I think, but it's
Yeah,
so good. I enjoy it so much.
so good. It'll warm you right up.
Exactly. And then one last thing, which is one tool that you cannot live without and swear by.
Okay. Well, I think it's going to have to be an AI tool. Right now, I'm really obsessed with a tool called Whisper.
Oh,
It's
Whisper Flow?
speech to text. Yes, Whisper Flow. And it's just been such a game changer for me because I think this is the case for most people. When you write, you immediately start to edit, right? Like, even though you're trying to write directly from your brain, you will immediately start to edit. With Whisper Flow, I can just dictate and just kind of word vomit a little bit onto the page, and then I can always go back and edit it later. But it gets the entirety of my thought on paper immediately.
Mm.
And I've found that extremely useful. So, whether that's a Slack message that I'm dictating to my team, or even just like the first draft of a Notion page, or now I'm even using it to like text people back. Honestly, it's just hotkey, start talking, and then like hit enter, delete some things, whatever it is. And I feel like I'm typing and just put output is so much faster than when I used to just try to sit and like get hit by the blank page and not know where to start.
I gotta try this tool out because you're the third person on this thing that has recommended that tool, and I gotta
Really?
try it because
Okay. Well, then I think you have to.
everybody keeps speaking about it, and I'm curious as to what it is. Like, I mean, I know the gist of it, but I haven't tried it. But I will give it a go, and see how it goes. Thank you so much, Clara. Really appreciate it. Where can listeners find you?
Yeah, absolutely. Check us out on LinkedIn. You can follow me, Clara Ma, search me up, and then check out our website, askachiefofstaff.com. Whether you're a current chief of staff looking to up-level and upskill yourself, we have a community with workshops, mentorship, and executive coaching we would love for you to be a part of. Or if you're an executive who's looking to hire a chief of staff, go to our website as well. Fill out the form. We'd love to chat with you, help you figure out what it is that you're looking for in a chief of staff and find you the right person.
Clara, it's been fantastic. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day and having a chat with me. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Perfect. Well, folks, if you got value out of this, share it with someone who needs to hear it. I'll see you next week. Thank you. Bye bye.